these are things that have taken me a really long time to figure out, and I wish that I had learned that really early on.
Welcome to the Wedding Celebrant Show with me, Lisa Flant, an independent wedding celebrant living and working in the beautiful county of Cornwall. On the show, I'll be sharing insights, tips and a confession or two, as well as chatting to some amazing wedding professionals along the way. So if you're planning a wedding, or if you're a professional wedding celebrant, or perhaps you're just interested in some behind-the-scenes gossip, then this is the podcast for you. Welcome to the third episode of the Wedding Celebrant Show with me, Lisa Flant, independent owner and lead celebrant of Celebrant in Cornwall, and thank you for listening. For this show, I am delighted to introduce you to a rather special guest, fellow celebrant and colleague Hazel Jane, who I met during my celebrant training back in 2018. And when Hazel had a wedding in Devon this summer, we took the opportunity to meet up and we found ourselves comparing notes about what we wish we'd known when starting our celebrant journey. And I said to Hazel, this would be a great topic for a podcast. So here we are. But just to give you a little background to Hazel, she is based in Glasgow along with her husband and baby girl, and she conducts all types of ceremonies in some of the most beautiful locations in Scotland, including my favourite, the Highlands. And as you will discover, Hazel is also an interfaith minister, which means, unlike celebrants in England, she can conduct legal weddings in Scotland, and this has been a complete game changer to her business. But I will let her tell you more about this in due course. So a big warm welcome to you, Hazel. I'm so happy you could join us.
So delighted to be here, Lisa. Thank you for having me.
Oh, you're so welcome. It's so lovely to have you on our show. And I have to say how very happy I am that we have stayed in touch all this time. It has been so wonderful to grow our businesses together and to support one another. And I'm so grateful for that. So thank you for being my celebrant buddy all these years.
Well, thank you. And I think we'll probably jump into it later. But actually having those friends, having those colleagues, it can be such an independent and lonely job. And just knowing that I have you, even though you're so far away, all the way on the other side of the country, it just is the best feeling to know that if I was ever running into trouble or if I ever needed advice, there are people that I can turn to. So I'm also really grateful to have you.
Oh, that's so nice to hear. So let's just set the scene. Hazel and I first met on our Celebrant training course. Now, this was an in-person course, not online like so many courses are these days. And she and I instantly clicked and we became student buddies. And our trainer would probably tell you we were the naughtier ones in the group, because there might have been a bit of note passing and inappropriate eye rolling at times. Okay, so let us think back to those heady days of training. What do you remember about that time?
I do remember feeling like the world of celebrancy in general was really murky. And I think that's probably still quite correct for a lot of people who are either looking for a celebrant or are thinking about becoming a celebrant. I was getting completely lost in organizations that were offering certificates for things. I didn't know if I needed a certificate. I didn't know if any of that actually meant anything in the real world. I didn't know specifically what was expected of a celebrant once you actually become one and you're showing up and you're working with couples. So I suppose I remember just hoping that all of these questions were going to be answered. And then, the training was quite brief. I think was 2 days?
Yeah.
And it's one of those it was a group setting where you're sort of teaching yourselves along the way. You're all answering questions onto a whiteboard to get to the finished product. So I think I left wondering if I had learned everything that I would need to learn. And there was quite a focus on just, I suppose, like a gentle, lovely wedding ceremony. And for me, I always wanted to really delve into what it means to have ceremony and what it means to process something and to transition and to create something with people. So I don't know if we kind of dived in enough, but it was a starting point for sure.
Yes, definitely. I suppose light touch might be the right phrase about it. And I definitely had that feeling, as you did, that when we'd finished the course, it was like, oh gosh, I actually feel like there's so much more to learn. And there were particular areas for me. I did have a slight advantage, obviously, as a legal registrar with a bit of background. I knew how a ceremony worked. But a good example for me would be things like rituals, I guess. I didn't know how to deliver a ritual. I didn't even know what a ritual was. And I'm going to be a bit controversial, and you jump in if you want to. I think there is definitely a pay to pass culture in a lot of courses these days, particularly celebrant training courses. So you pay the money, you pass the course. And I've seen it myself because I have been a trainer and a mentor for a well-known celebrant training provider. And that kind of approach, I just think it's so wrong on so many levels, because it's wrong for the trainee. They get this really false sense of their abilities and it leads to unrealistic expectations. And it's wrong for the industry because we get poor quality celebrants and ceremonies. But that is probably another podcast altogether.
Yeah, I think it's such a difficult thing because it's such a subjective career. You know, you want someone who's a good writer. Even good writing is pretty subjective. You want someone that's a pretty good speaker or a very good speaker, you could hope for. And actually, it's hard to measure people on that. And I think we just live in a culture where no one wants to offend anyone. No one wants to fail at anything. I don't think any celebrancy courses have really opened themselves up with, you may fail this. Like, that's just never been a thing that's existed. Maybe those ones that have offered certificates, I don't think so. I don't think it's just ever been part of the culture of training celebrants that you may not actually be good enough to get this qualification or to be launched or to be backed by a certain organisation. If you do the course, if you're semi-literate, if you want to do it, you can do it. And of course, part of the reason that you can do it is that you don't really need to pass anything, because anyone can be a wedding celebrant, certainly in England.
So now, Hazel, you are almost into your 7th year of being a celebrant. Are there other things about becoming a celebrant you wish you'd known then that you know now?
Oh my goodness, how much time do you have? Well, 7 years is a slightly big number because I trained originally, obviously, with you in 2018, and I was always living in Scotland, so I wasn't able with that initial training to conduct legally binding ceremonies, which basically meant I wasn't very popular. So I did do some symbolic weddings and a few funerals, but I wasn't really in celebrant mode. Like, I had a full-time job, I was working, and then it wasn't till I was ordained as an interfaith minister in 2021 that I was able to conduct legally binding ceremonies. And then I started to pick up the business a lot more. But it wasn't until October 2021 that I was doing legally binding ceremonies. So actually, I still feel in some ways a little bit new, but I am very blessed that I've had an incredibly busy few years. So I do feel like I've had a lot of on-the-job learning now. And there's so many things that I have had to pick up along the way. Every mistake that you can possibly think of, I'm sure I've made it at some point. And it's taken really up until now to feel comfortable and confident walking into a ceremony space and thinking to myself, I know how this is going to work. I know where my job is. I know where I need to rely on other people. And then I can actually let it flow. So these are things that have taken me a really long time to figure out. And I wish that I had learned that really early on so that I could just have that confidence. I had to learn in a room of 100 people watching, how am I actually going to do this while I'm holding the microphone? Am I going to put it down? Am I going to rest it somewhere? Am I giving it to someone? Am I trying to tuck it under my armpit?
Yeah.
All these, I've tried them all. And I have a bit of a system now. But definitely things like that, things like microphones, things like speaking to musicians when I'm coming into the room and we're going through cues together and we're figuring out exactly what they're going to do, what they're waiting for me to do, what I'm waiting for them to do, speaking to photographers, letting them know where I'll be, what positioning the couple is planning on doing, speaking to planners. These are not things that I feel like we're ever really touched on, but actually make the biggest difference on the day. When you walk into the room and you're letting everyone know that you know how this ceremony is going to go, beyond reading something off a piece of paper, there's just so much more to a ceremony than that. And that's the things that I had to kind of learn along the way.
I think what you've just described to me is the difference between a celebrant and a professional celebrant. Because there's no querying what you're doing when you know exactly what the pitfalls are, how it's got to run smoothly. You have that confidence. You're not querying yourself. And it takes time and it takes experience. And while they could teach you some of those elements on a course, and it would be blimmin' helpful, let's face it, it is really only experience that gives you that. I think once we'd qualified and we met up for lunch down in Plymouth not so long after, I think it was actually just as we were coming out of lockdown, you and I met. And I do remember one of the conversations we had, which was about kind of expectations and how that really wasn't covered in training, because I think it's so easy to think, well, I've done the course, I've got the certificate, I've got a website, I've got my Instagram. The bookings, they're just going to flood in. Because often that is what your training provider leads you to believe as well. But, you know, as we've found, you've got to put in the work, you've got to do your research, you've got to think about who your ideal client is if you want to target them. You've got to think about all of your marketing, and you have to constantly refine it as well. And, you know, mentioning things like the pandemic, of course, you know, if we'd had a crystal ball, things would have been different. You know, we had COVID, so we didn't have any work for a year. And then we had an insanely busy time. And even now, couples are definitely tightening their belts. You know, the cost of living crisis has had an impact, certainly on celebrants like myself who are not legally able to deliver a ceremony. I think what I'm saying is, it's been a real roller coaster, no matter which way you look at it.
Getting those first bookings is so hard. Once you've got that snowball going and people can see that you're booked, they can see that you're getting great feedback, you've got testimonials, then it starts to happen naturally. Of course, the cost of living has played a really big role in that. And I know lots of vendors across the full wedding industry who are really suffering and thinking about next year. 2025 seems to be quite a big year of things slowing down. 2024, I think we're still seeing people who were engaged or who kind of met during the pandemic. Those weddings are coming to fruition now. 2025 is maybe a little bit slower for a lot of people. But yeah, that starting moment, doing those first ceremonies, I don't envy anyone who is in that position. And I really feel for those brand new celebrants who are also in a much more saturated market than perhaps even we were 6 years ago. So I don't have any advice really for anyone, but I do remember thinking I was going to throw up at my very first wedding, just like, this is real and there's 100 people staring at me and I don't really know where I'm supposed to be standing and what is exactly expected and what if this all goes wrong. So it's hard, you know, that once you come out of that training, the certificate gets you so far, and then having to make those first steps, I think is really, really terrifying, and I respect anyone that goes and does it.
And that's actually where some celebrant training organisations are great, because they have these little support networks, whether it's on Facebook or whatever, where you can kind of say, and I don't think this happened quite so much in our time, but you can say, oh my gosh, it is my first ceremony and I'm absolutely petrified. And everybody's there going, you'll be fine, you'll be great, breathe, remember to drink water, all those things. And you also see post-ceremony celebrants being really supportive. So there are lots of good things about training organisations these days, I do think. So let me take you back again to building your business from the outset. And you talked about some practical challenges that you encountered. Did you find there were other things that you needed support with that perhaps you weren't really expecting or anticipating?
For me, the scariest thing that I came into was the lack of process that I had. So at the very beginning, it's just me and my Google Drive and an inbox, and like, we'll just figure it out as it happens. And that's fine if you're doing maybe 5 weddings a year. You could maybe stretch to 10 weddings a year, depending on who you are as a person. I know some celebrants who still just use that process and they are doing like 40 or 50 weddings a year. And they are insane as far as I'm concerned. Once you get into kind of double digits of ceremonies and you've got timelines and you've got people to wrangle and you've got people who owe you emails, you've got people that owe you money. Oh my goodness, I was drowning very, very early on, and I had never really anticipated the amount of admin that would need to be done, and really just the importance of having an end-to-end process. There are incredible writers and performers out there, and that's amazing. Like, it's an incredible thing. But we also have to be a safe pair of hands because it's such an important day. You have to know that your celebrant is not at any risk of getting your date wrong or forgetting the time that your ceremony starts. There's so many little bits of information that are important for us to know. That's things like knowing and remembering if someone's got a parent who has passed away or multiple parents who have passed away. You don't want to be showing up saying, "Where's your mum? Oh, I'm sure your dad's so delighted to see you," because you've forgotten that they're estranged from their parent. Like, we have to really be careful about knowing the things that are important. Well, maybe there's people out there that have phenomenal memories and can just absorb all of that and keep it in their minds, but I'm certainly not one of them. So it's really important for me that I'm taking notes and actively keeping track of that. And I had just never expected that it would need to be such a honed in process of keeping track of everything that happens along the way, beyond just showing up and doing a lovely job on the day, which I also hope I do.
Oh, I know you do. I know you do, for sure. Just to pick up on something you said, which I think kind of tends to drift into the behavioural side of things. I think I would have liked to have been more prepared for client behaviour. Slightly controversial, but it really took me quite a long while to appreciate that not everyone behaves as you might expect. And an example of this is ghosting, which seems so rude to me, but it really is quite the norm. Or do you not find that? How does ghosting impact your business?
It's a great question. First of all, I feel very lucky that I haven't experienced a huge amount of ghosting. I think partly that's down to, and I know that you are too, I'm very transparent on my website about costs. I think a lot of ghosting in the wedding industry broadly can come from the fact that if you're not putting if you're not even giving people a ballpark, and then they inquire and then you send back a figure and they just go, "Oh, that's the wrong number for us." But I've got that on my website. I'm very happy for that to just be up there. So in general, if people are contacting me, at least via my website, then I know that they have seen how much the kind of costing is and that they like me enough to get in touch with me. So it's a pretty good initial standing. I also created a system whereby once I have an initial meeting with a couple, oh, look at this, trade secrets. It's not really trade secrets, but I have an initial meeting with a couple. Everyone gets a 30-minute, no obligation video call. I'm very happy to provide that. And at the end of that meeting, I tell them, I'm going to send you a quote. It's open for 2 weeks. At the end of 2 weeks, it will send you a reminder and then it will go away. And then that is enough communication to me that you're just not interested and you don't want to move forward. And that's totally fine. If you do want to go ahead, you can hit accept quote.
I think the ones I just find are kind of weird, and I'm possibly slightly more sensitive than you on this, is that you get the volume of inquiries who are so keen to talk to you. Oh my gosh, they're keen to book you. They've got their date. There's a lot of sharing. And then there's nothing, because you say, "Oh yeah, I'm free. I'd love to work with you, but let's have a chat first. Let's see if we're a good fit." Then nothing. And for me, I just have to be really wary not to overthink it and just do my best to cope with what I still see as a form of rejection. It's a kind of rude form of rejection, but I just have to approach it perhaps more in your way, Hazel. Okay, so we are on a bit of a roll now, handing out our advice to everyone, a few trade secrets here and there. Can I ask you, what would you say to somebody thinking about becoming a celebrant?
Oh my goodness. I think I would say that it is truly the best job in the entire world. And I stand by that. Like, I love my job. I feel completely blessed to do it. More recently, I've had a few of those chats that I had heard about when I first became a celebrant and no one had ever done to me, which is people saying, oh, that sounds like a nice Saturday job. Oh, that's a nice bit of money on the side. Maybe I should do that. And I always think, I'm not going to swear on this podcast, but I am swearing at you internally because I put so much work and love into what I do. It takes hours. It takes me full days to write ceremonies. It takes my weekend to go and conduct them. This is not a little side job. Well, maybe if you just want to do 5 or 6 a year, sure. But it is incredibly hard work, and there's a lot of personal marketing that goes into it, and there's just a lot of figuring out what your style is, and you have to really be ready to do that and be ready to figure out what kind of celebrant you want to be. Is this something that you want to pursue? And I think nowadays, and again slightly less so when we started, it really is such a busy market. So you want to be a celebrant, awesome. So does your next door neighbor, so does their dad, like so does your niece. You know, it really is such a busy market. And I think if you're going to do it, really believe in it, really want to believe in love and believe in the magic of it. And I just don't want it to become something that people do because they think it's a bit of pocket money. Like, I think it's such a beautiful thing that we get to do with people. And I selfishly want to keep it that way.
Oh, I love that. Me too. I did hear a training provider say to their trainees, there's room for everyone. They said, look at your local high street and look at how many coffee shops there are and look at all the hairdressers. There's always a new one opening up. There's tons of space. And it's the same as celebrants. That's what they said. And I remember thinking, you cannot compare being an independent professional celebrant with being a hairdresser or a coffee shop, because we all need our haircut and we all quite like going out for a cup of coffee. But we don't all need the services of a celebrant. In fact, we rarely need the services of a celebrant. It's a niche business. And so if you have more celebrants on your patch, like we do down here in Cornwall in particular, the availability of work, it's going to be diluted. So I think I would probably suggest to people, just do your research. And as you've said a few times, particularly if you're thinking about becoming a full-time celebrant, giving up your job to do this, you need to make sure the work is going to be there for you.
You don't need a celebrant that often. You'll be getting married maybe once, maybe a couple of times. Probably won't pick the same celebrant if you do get married multiple times. And then, of course, you might have family members who pass away and you might want to work with the same celebrant. But certainly it's not something that you're getting repeat business from.
I tell you what did happen to me though, Hazel. I married a couple of years ago, 3 years ago maybe, and I did their renewal of wedding vows this year. So, repeat business. I don't think it's going to make me a lot of money generally, but it happens.
I love that. I think that's amazing. And do you know, this is terrible business, but I always think if a couple came back and wanted a renewal of vows, like I would just want to give it to them because I'd be like so proud that they had, you know, that they'd lasted and that I had been the person to do their marriage ceremony. So I would be delighted to do a renewal of vows. And sometimes people, especially international couples, will, you know, they'll promise me that they'll come back to Scotland and we'll do it all again in 5 or 10 years. So there you go. That's the half price vow renewal. Is that the...
Hazel,
full price.
That's exactly what I did. I did a half price vow renewal because I was so happy for them.
The business acumen there is zero.
So we're going to take a break there, and coming up next time on the Wedding Celebrant Show, we'll be back with more insights and inspiration from interfaith minister and celebrant Hazel Jane in part 2 of What I Wish I'd Known When Starting My Celebrant Journey. Bye for now. That wraps it up for this episode. Thanks so much for listening to the Wedding Celebrant Show, brought to you by the team at Celebrant in Cornwall.